what you would tell your younger self as what you've learnt in leadership, and maybe just a little bit about your career and your experience in leadership. I'm going to start at this end, so maybe Harriet Baldwin, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. Just a little reflection on what you would tell your younger self, and maybe a little introduction to yourself.
Well, it's a great honour to be amongst this incredibly accomplished group of people, and thank you so much for involving me in this wonderful Women's Forum. And it's also a huge privilege to be back in Rwanda for my 4th visit, so always wonderful to return. And my name is Harriet Baldwin. I'm a Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, and in David Cameron's government I was a Minister of Finance, and in Theresa May's government I was Defence Procurement Minister, and then a Foreign Office Minister, where I had the privilege of working in partnership with many Commonwealth countries, particularly in Africa. And before politics, into which I was a managing director at JP Morgan Investment Management, so I invested people's pensions. And just yourself would be quite astonished, I think, to meet me, because I don't think she anticipated that I would do all those things. I never considered going into the financial sector, and I never considered going into politics, so I think she would be quite astonished. But I have thoroughly enjoyed this path, and I think the advice that I would give my younger self is therefore to kind of aim high. Don't let people tell you you can't do things. I think about growing up in a family where I was the first girl ever to go to university, and I think about aim high in the context of education. So it's so important that we take the opportunities that education gives us, and that we follow our education through as fast and as far as possible. I think that's the #1 piece of advice. And don't listen to the low expectations that sometimes people will impose on you and your view of yourself. So aim high. The second thing I would say is accept that you will fail from time to time, that there will be occasions when you don't succeed in your path. You will get knocked back along the way, but pick yourself up, learn from those setbacks, and set yourself further on your path, and focus on the things that really matter in terms of your journey. And then the third thing, which I've learned in politics, is if you don't ask, you don't get. And so you just have to keep asking, and eventually you will get there. One of my big campaigns in the UK Parliament at the moment is that we still reserve 1/8 of the seats in our upper house for men only. Can you believe that? Through the hereditary peerages, it's basically 1/8 of the seats are men only. I'm going to get that changed in my lifetime. And in a parliament where we're only 1/3 women, I'm going to get to 50-50 parliament in the UK Parliament in my lifetime. And so you've got to aim for these things, and one of the things I've done on the backbench is to set up this international parliamentary network of people parliamentarians who campaign for an education for every child in this world. And please join me on that campaign as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Harriet. And I think that issue of education is already coming through strongly from our lightning talks. I'm sure we're going to hear it from other panelists as well. I think that's something critical that the Commonwealth really does need to focus on. I'm going to move along our panel. I'm going to introduce Mrs. Cherie Blair. Welcome. It's really good to have you with us. I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm going to ask you just to reflect a little bit on what you would tell your former self, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself, because I think it's a nice kind of way to give the kind of messages that you want to give. Please, over to you.
Right, well, I'm Cherie Blair, and when I was 14, I told the girls in my grammar school that I was going to be the first woman Prime Minister. Well, of course, Margaret Thatcher beat me to that, but I did get to number 10 Downing Street. When I was listening to what Harriet was saying, what our earlier speakers were saying, the thing that struck me most of all was what came through was that everybody needs the ability to make their own choices about what is best for them. But the reality in the world, of course, is that for women and girls, so often, as we heard, those choices are made for them. And I often say, I was so lucky to be born when I was, in the second half of the 20th century, where I was in Western Europe, at a time when choices were opening up for girls like me. Sometimes people say to me, oh, Cherie, you've come so far from working class Liverpool. How, your mother and grandmother must be so proud of you. And yes, they were. But I also think, how far could they have gone if they'd had the choices that were open to me? And I'm very, very conscious that Harriet and I and many of the women in this room are privileged to be able to make our own choices, because too many women across the world don't have that ability. I think the second thing I heard from what we've already spoken about was that we have to have confidence in ourselves. And clearly at 14, I had that confidence. And maybe that was because, I don't know, I was brought up in an all-female household. But the reality is, of course, again, for women and girls across the world, they're too often told what they can't do, rather than having had the confidence to believe that they can do whatever those choices are that they want to make. And that negative messaging, that stereotyping about, I find it now with my Women's Foundation, women entrepreneurs in many countries told women don't do business. You probably found that in banking. I'm sure others have found that too. Women aren't good with managing money. Or in my case, when it came to, I went as a barrister, and at the end of my training, there was a choice between a male barrister and a female barrister. And they said to me, well, Cherie, obviously we're going to go for the boy because, you're a girl and who knows where life will take you. And, I accepted that because obviously back in those times, people thought, well, yes, we do have women barristers, and Patricia Scotland and I are contemporaries in that, but they're only there on sufferance. Well, they made a bet that the boy would be a better long-term lawyer. Well, here I am 45 years later, and I'm still going in the law. The boy, on the other hand, he left after 7 years and went and did something else. So those assumptions about who's the best bet were wrong. I know that because I married him. And yeah, the boy was Tony Blair, and he had turned out to do something else, So don't let your confidence be undermined in the things that people tell you you can't do. And then my final message, I suppose, is about diversity. So obviously I had that knockback in my earlier career. I found somewhere else to take me, and I was so determined to prove that there was nothing that the men could do that I couldn't do too. That I pushed myself. I did ridiculous things. So they had to hospitalize me at the end with my first pregnancy, because they said, if you don't take some rest and stop running around to court, this baby is going to suffer. He's fine now. He's doing pretty well, in fact. And then, I didn't have much maternity leave, and I didn't ask for some support during my maternity leave. And then suddenly, when my daughter was born, I thought, this isn't working. Just because men lawyers do it this way doesn't mean it's the only way. Actually, we can do it differently. Sometimes we'll do it better. I'm not saying every time we'll do it better, but diversity is the key. It's about embracing the fact that you are a woman, that you are a woman of colour, that you are a woman with a disability, that you are a woman of a different sexual orientation. Diversity is what we need in the world, and through diversity, through those different life experiences, we can do things in a much better way, which isn't just one size fits all. So let's make sure we get the choices. Let's feel confident in the choices that we make, and let's embrace the fact that we can be different, and that means that we can make a better contribution to the challenges, to solving the challenges which we undoubtedly have in this world.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Blair. Thank you. Our next speaker is Honourable Thembi Nkadimeng from South Africa. Thembi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and good morning. I stand on the protocols, First Lady, and all our dignitaries. I'm a Deputy Minister of Traditional Government and Cooperative Governance in South Africa, the former President of SALGA, which is the South African Local Government Associations of Municipalities. I'm currently the Chairperson of the Commonwealth Women in Local Government Network. What would I say to the girl? Don't quit.
Yeah.
It looks easy, it looks glamorous, it looks doable, but hey girl, it's tough. But never look back. Secondly, I will say to her, don't forget the women of yesteryear. They were pathfinders. They were trailblazers. And very often, as we are at the table, we sometimes forget that they paved the way to the table. And possibly lastly, I will say, don't take any pity. Well, that is if there's any pity anyway. But where I come from, there's very little of it. You get pushed as if you are a normal human being, of which you are. So men shove to the fore and forget that you're a woman. So you shove back. You push back. If there's no table, create another one. And you're possibly going to beat them because you're more organized. You're more naturalist by nature. Development is your middle name. If a municipality is not dysfunctional, you understand it's dysfunctional. You understand that I have to get water because I have to cook. So there's a purpose for you to get delivered. There's a purpose for you to make government functional. I think for others, it's just a side way. What are we having for dinner tonight? You have to make sure that it is even there. So for me, it's nobody will pity you. But at the end of the day, when you have been bruised by the world, what keeps the girl of today going is what May Albertina Sisulu said, one of the founding members of the Bantu Women's League in South Africa, one of the participants of the 1955 Women First big diversified rally to the then apartheid state, which had ran South Africa for over 300 years at the time, said, take stock. It is not about you. It is not for you. Make sure as you rise the following day, carry someone, carry another woman with you, and the battle will be better. I think it will be confusing to her, but that's what I will say to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to bring in our next panelist. I'm going to ask her the same question. Dr. Ensign from the American University of Nigeria. Please, over to you. A little reflection on, what you would tell your former self, and then just tell us a little bit about your work and your work in leadership and women's leadership.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with all of you, Your Excellency, and to be with these incredible women on the panel. I'm not sure how much I can add. I've been the president of the American University of Nigeria, which is located in northeast Nigeria, and we've been in a state of emergency most of the time that I've been the president there, the last 8 years. And it's a reminder every day that we must fight every day for young people who don't have what we have, who don't have the privileges. I live in a part of the world where there are more children out of school than any other part of the world. And we can't make progress as a country, as a society, as a world, unless we make sure those children are in school. So I would say to myself, fight harder every day. Our time here is very short, and we must use it, as you have said so eloquently, not for us. We're the privileged ones, right? No matter what hardship we've had, we have made it to a point. So work for those who are not part of the system and won't be unless they have advocates and they have mentors and they have people who fight every day to make them part of the system and to make sure they have an education, because that's the pathway to whom we all are. So thank you.
Thank you, Margie. And just to kind of round off this section before we get into the sort of the meat of the discussion, let me just bring in our final panelist, Honourable Shandana Gulzar Khan. Please, just a little bit, what would you tell your younger self? What would you tell your older self? Sorry. And then a little bit, that's because I'm looking at you and you don't really look old enough to be able to say that. And then also just a little bit about, your experience in leadership.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And before I forget, I always forget this, but thank you, Rwanda. You've been very kind to us. You've been very helpful. And it always helps when you land in a country for the first time. I've been to Africa many times, but it's really nice when people treat you nicer than you expected. So thank you. And given what Rwanda's been through, my country's been through it many times in different ways. So it's heartening to know that the pain of what this country has gone through is not reflected in how they treat other people. And so that's incredible. At present, I'm in a funny position. I have resigned from my post as Member of Parliament, but the current Speaker and the Chief Election Commissioner refuses to accept my resignation because they don't want to trigger an election. So I can safely say I'm still the chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians, an honor. Thank you for the age comment. I will be 50 in 3 years' time, so I'm pretty old for the part of the world that I come from. Just good genes so far, thank God. In terms of what would I tell my younger or older self, it's just one thing. And it's not a lesson that I learned, it's a lesson that I learn every day, and it's still hard. And that is trust. I don't trust anyone, especially men. No offense to you, Stephen, the Secretary General of our CPA. I don't trust, because where I grew up, when I grew up, and how I grew up, it was not a woman who pushed me to achieve or be my best, whatever that may be. It was my father. And I found that, funnily enough, at the time I thought he's being a bully. He forced me to go to school, he forced me to go to college, he forced me to get a job, he forced me to take off my veil. And was I angry? I cried for 3 weeks. I said, this is typical male patriarchy telling me what to do. And he said, no, this is not about you. And that is where my trust came in. Men are supposed to be the enemy, right? Given the circumstances, what I faced in our country. I'm from one of the most conservative parts of Pakistan, the north. My village is about 45 minutes away from Afghanistan border. And he said that if there's going to be a transformation for women, if there's going to be a transformation for equality, it has to start with my daughter. I cannot tell other people's daughters and women, leave the veil, leave the burqa, and just get out there. It has to be by example. We don't force, we invite. And thank God for him and his far-sightedness. Today in my village, although I'm the first girl from my school who went to my village who went to school, we have doctors, we have engineers, we have healthcare workers, and even today, where trust is concerned, I have to remind myself that there is good in the world. We just have to seek it, and we have to trust ourselves as well to know that we will find it. So that's my message. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's interesting that you kind of cite, the influence of your father, because I think, that we so often hear how influential fathers can be, particularly fathers in all-girl households, in terms of really being the lever that makes the change and makes that happen. So I think for all the men in the audience, I think that's a really valid kind of message to be taking home to all of our countries around the Commonwealth. And I think one of the things that we really want to look at in this session is really how we can deepen the kind of leadership that women are engaged in, and really ensure that that women leadership is delivering, that leadership is delivering, not just women's leadership is delivering, but that leadership is delivering, and that by having more women in leadership, we're really changing and making better the kinds of decisions that we're taking in all walks of life. And you as a panel really reflect the different walks of life that we've talked about, and obviously our previous lightning speakers as well. So I suppose now we're getting a little bit into the more kind of challenging issues, which is what are the things that we really need to change? What do we need to do differently? And what kind of levers and tools can we use to do that? So I'm actually going to start now at the other end. Shandan, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask you a question kind of linked to this, really, which is what needs to be done at a kind of legislative and a political level in your kind of view and your experience? And I know as kind of the president of the Women's Parliamentary Association, you'll obviously speak about Pakistan, but you can probably speak a bit more broadly on some of these issues as well. What needs to happen at the legislative and political level to ensure more meaningful women's leadership within politics, but also within industry and other areas of society? Please.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, how much time do I have for this response?
Well, about 5 minutes, I think, because we're very lucky we started early, so we've got the luxury of a little bit of time.
I
realise it's a big question for a short period of time.
It is, but I'll try to be brief. Thank you. So there's two things. If we talk about the political, it's almost always going to clash with the cultural. It is inevitable that clash will happen. Because when we say we want to change power structures, when we want equality, essentially you're changing the status quo. And unfortunately, I've seen, regardless of the country I've lived in, nobody likes to change the status quo. I don't like the word fighting for equality because it implies, in some sense, civil disobedience, and that's not it. We're not fighting for our rights. We're just trying to secure what already belongs to us. So political, that's a bit hard to manage. In terms of legislation, that's easier. 3 things we've done in Pakistan, and in the Commonwealth, many people did it before us. I have to say 2 of the women that influenced my political career in this particular sense is Dr. Fahmida Mirza. She's the first Muslim woman speaker. She was in Pakistan. And the other is, God bless her soul, the Deputy Speaker of Cameroon, Honorable Emilia Monjowa Lefaka. And interestingly, they taught that whatever you do, you can do through kindness. And in that we come to, it's funny to combine kindness with legislation, but that's exactly what we did. During COVID, we ensured that all the loans that go to women are part of our legislation. It's not a part of our constitution yet, and that's the next aim. 50% of all banking, funding, donor programs has to go to women. That's not in our constitution. We have equality as a principle, but unless we secure funding for women, we can forget about business, we can forget about education, and not every woman will have access to education. The point is to give her financial autonomy, and that is when you start making decisions. On the political, I think what we have started, and as I said, we're in a bit of a funny situation right now. We worked on 3 things. One, we worked on ensuring that our FTAs are free trade agreements, our bilateral investment treaties, and the planning commission documents of our country. They actually reflect a monitoring and evaluation section where we talk about how did this money impact this part of the country, because culturally Pakistan is extremely different from many parts, and unlike India, we have different languages, different races. We're not united by one language or one color. And so that makes it more difficult. Diversity is very important, but unification for achieving something even harder. So for the political, we need these three things, financial instruments. And finally, for the business side, I was just talking to our colleague at the Commonwealth, Arif Zaman Saab. We found out the hard way. This is the last point. At the World Economic Forum, I saw this survey was carried out nearly 3 years ago, that the world loses $16 trillion annually. It's off the table. 9 trillion coming from my part of the world, which is more populous than any other, simply because of the gender gap, the wage gap. And so it's easy to talk about reforming that, but the question is, are businesses ready to do that? And that's where I understand the real meat of the issue is. Politicians and legislature will be influenced by lobbies. And so are we going to change the structure? Are we going to talk about fairness? Are we going to talk about equality where it matters? And that's a hard one to crack. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think, I think it's very interesting to kind of hear, some of the things that you're already doing and some of those really practical steps that you're taking in Pakistan around this. And I'm sure there'll be interest in the audience on some of the ways in which that monitoring and evaluation is going to really understand and know the impact. Because when you put a financial figure on it, like that figure, that $1 trillion figure, it really is quite astonishing. And I think it really shows us how we can really move this, we must really move this agenda forward. And I guess you also said a little bit about kindness. And I want to come on to both Mrs. Cherie Blair and also Harriet Baldwin to just ask you both really the same question here, which is coming back a little bit to the issue around leadership culture. You're both obviously very active in working and supporting young leaders, women in leadership. And what do you think we need to do to sort of change leadership culture, really, to encourage more gender sensitivity in order to move towards this kind of idea of more meaningful leadership? What are the kinds of changes that you think need to happen in terms of the sort of culture of leadership, really? Maybe, Mrs. Blair, if I bring you in first, and then Harriet, I'll come to you.
For sure. Let me, first of all, absolutely agree with you about financial autonomy, because I talked before about choice. And if a woman can't control her own money, then she doesn't have the choice to leave an abusive relationship. She doesn't have the choice to insist her daughter goes to school. She doesn't have the choice to make sure her children are vaccinated. And so financial autonomy is so important, which is why my Women's Foundation works with women entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries to give them the training that they need, because so many women aren't educated. But that doesn't mean that in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, they can't have education about how to run a business. That gives them the access to mentoring, which gives them the access to networks, so that coming together, they can see that they are not alone, that they can see that there are alternative ways of doing things. And this is a problem whether you're talking about that girl in northern Pakistan. I've been up to those villages when I visited after the earthquake. And I saw the women sitting in one part of when they came to see me, and the men in the other. And I also saw that when the Pakistan government wanted to help them rebuild their societies, they did one training course which was about electricians, training them to be electricians. They thought that course was for men. Guess what? Half the people who signed up for that course were women. And when they said, why did this happen? Because the army had organized it and they were a little puzzled. The women said, in our society, we can't, now that we've lost our husbands, have men come into our house and mend our iron or whatever it is. But as a woman, I can go and do that, and then I can also earn some money myself and help other women. So, these assumptions about whatever it is, what a leader looks like, what an electrician looks like, what a lawyer looks like, what a politician looks like, by seeing that there's an alternative, it makes such a difference. And I think this happens as I say, in Pakistan. It also happens in the UK, where we still have so few women CEOs in our businesses. We don't have enough women in Parliament, unlike Rwanda. When you look at, if you ask about giving women a financial autonomy, if you want $10 and you want microfinance, you'll probably get it. But if you want $50,000 because you've got a small business that's employing other people, wants to go further, it's so, so difficult because banks have views about women. You know, they say things like, women don't understand money. What does your husband think about this? Time and time again, the women we work with tell us that. And also there are laws about who's a good value for giving loans to, often based on who owns property. And many laws stop women owning property, or their own inheritance laws give the daughters less than the sons. We can change those if we work on it. And then if we look at the top level, the venture capitalism level, only 3% of the venture capital money in the world goes to women. And you think to yourself, why? Because of the figures you quoted. We know that actually the world would be better off if women had the chance to contribute to the economy equally with men. Those figures aren't fictitious. Those figures come out year after year after year, and yet these really clever people, apparently, who invest in the best businesses that are going to lead us, you know, to a better tomorrow, only 3% go to women. That's an accounting error. And that's why, in fact, when we look at things, you have to, in the end, force the issue. And which is why I'm in favour, to take one concrete example, of quotas. I don't see it as a long-term solution, but it is a short-term fix that gives a shot in the arm and accelerates the opportunities for women. We've seen it absolutely illustrated here in Rwanda. We've seen it in our country with things like the 30% Club. We're seeing it now in Europe with the European Commission requiring now 40% of women on boards. You know, but it's not enough to have a token woman in these high-up positions. It has to permeate from the very bottom of an organization to the top. So quotas help, but changing the culture takes time. And what I've found is that for many women, when they find that the culture isn't suiting them at the workplace, their solution is to go and do it for themselves. That's why women's entrepreneurship is so important, because then you can actually create the kind of business structures that you want to see, that you wished you'd seen in your other businesses. And I'm sure you wished to see in Morgan Stanley, that you wished to see in Pakistan, that you wished to see in South Africa. And so sisters really do it for themselves when they set up their own businesses, and we need to support that, and we need to make it easier for women to get access at whatever level it is to that financial capital that enables them to make those choices that will change the world.
Thank you. And I guess financial kind of or access to finance is also really critical in terms of standing for political leadership. And I wonder whether, you know, Harriet, you might want to reflect when you sort of answer that same question a little bit also on how important that is to politicians around the world.
Absolutely. And the world recently lost a very great woman, the first US female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. And she, of course, had the famous phrase that there's a special place in hell for women who do not help other women. And I know that she will be in heaven, because she was an amazing inspiration. And I think the role of leadership and role models, whether it's, we've enjoyed 70 years of having a female head of state in the UK with Her Majesty the Queen reaching 70 years on the throne, but we've also had in the last 50 years or so 2 female prime ministers. Cherie didn't quite get there, but she got to number 10, and absolutely there've been these female role models. One of the funniest remarks that I've heard former Prime Minister Theresa May make was she met a young girl who said, "Can men be Prime Minister?" and you know, that's how important role models are, because it does make people realize what the possible is. But I also think that it's wonderful when men are part of that journey and in fact it's crucial when men are part of that journey. And I always found myself that the best feminists are men with daughters. And when I was a Treasury Minister, I wanted to do something for women in the financial services sector, because it's the highest paid sector in our country. We know how important finance is, and yet very few women in it, making it into leadership positions, making it into the highest paid roles. The gender pay gap is the widest in any sector in the UK. And so we brainstormed what we could do about it. And I worked with Mark Carney, who many of you will know from when he was Governor of the Bank of England and now UN and Prime Minister Climate Envoy, very involved in climate finance. And he has 5 daughters. And so he was a fantastic ally in establishing something called the Women in Finance Charter, which I'm glad to say has gone on to greater things and set an aspiration for the boards of all the financial services companies in the UK to aim to have 30% of their senior leadership be female. And there was the 30% club that did the same for boards. But 30% is not good enough, is it? No, we're at 30% parliamentarians now, 33% I think it is. Not good enough. We need to aim to get to 50-50. Where Cherie and I will differ is that I'm not in favour of quotas myself. I think the targets and goals and aspirations are equally important and often get buy-in from wider sector. You don't want to exclude men. I think you've got to work with men, and I found that working with men with daughters has been particularly effective. But it goes back to the point I was making at the beginning, which is it's all about education. Until all of us in this room make sure that every boy and girl in our countries gets that educational opportunity, we will leave that $16 trillion of economic expansion on the table. We will have far too few women making it into the higher echelons of education, and let's all commit today to changing that.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've talked about education, we've talked a lot about legislation and policy. What are the other kind of ways in which we can really see change in terms of getting, first, more women into leadership positions, but also ensuring that they're in positions to be able to make meaningful decisions once they're there? So I'm going to come to our final 2 speakers to reflect on this. So I'm going to come first to you, Honourable Nkadimeng, just quickly, just reflecting on some of those other drivers for change.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, once more. I think supporting institutions that are supposed to develop and produce quality women leadership is one key thing, which often, because we focus on legislation and quotas, we seem to leave behind. A good example is the South African experience. I will actually have to think for a day and a half of which policy doesn't promote women emancipation. Nothing. 50-50 we got in all spheres of government. In fact, it blinded us. It blinded us to everything else that for the first time in local government elections just 5 months ago, we reduced women representation from 62% to 37%. So it's there in paper. Nobody has withdrawn it. But we're sitting today in the ministry that I'm heading, 37%. In the 2016 elections, we're 62, almost 63%, 62.7%. So the question is, what did we do? Right or wrong for an erosion from 62 to 37? Our supporting institutions were not strong enough. We didn't advocate strong enough for the development of these women, but in the real sense, right? If it means registering her at a university, an institution of higher learning in science, if you think you want to close and bridge a gap in the sciences, in the finance industry or whatever, be direct, be focused, and calculate daily what is your outcome. Yes, we have those institutions. Yes, they accept 50% plus. But where are our women towards the pole now? We're looking for one another and there's nobody. So we dropped the ball. And to me that I was like, wow, this yesterday women must be turning in their graves of what we've done out of their bedroom. But honestly, what is support for a woman in leadership? And I do wish sometime when we get an opportunity as women, we've got to be real and practical. I'm certain here if there's a woman who's expecting, there's not even a designated parking area for her. And she can't walk to this room. Hey, there's nobody who even aided her to come here. And what do we want? What do we expect from her? And what is the world which doesn't pity you anyway, as I said, expects you to be present daily as if nothing has happened, as if nothing is going on in your life, a life-changing situation that you are facing. But our systems, if it's there in a policy, it's there. No one even cares. If that designated parking area, it's there. If myself not friendly, we will respect, and there won't be anybody who say such small things. If we leave them, they then become exponential. They go into bigger areas, and at the end of the day, we see them not covered. What do we learn through from implementing projects? We are good at piloting as women, and really I do clap hands for us because I appreciate them. They are eye-openers because they are meant to be, pilots are meant to be eye-openers for you to rectify there, correct where there are issues, close where there are gaps in policies and everything else. But when we don't launch hard, and I think those are the silent issues that I think needs to be penetrated into our story, and we should fly high. Support structures are key everywhere else.
Thank you. And Dr. Ensign, let me ask you the same question. What are the other drivers that we can use and really kind of bring into play in terms of supporting more women into meaningful positions in leadership?
So everything that these amazing women have talked about is important. Financial inclusion. You said financial freedom. I will use that from now on. That's the correct term. Training women to be entrepreneurships, critically important. The policies that are needed, and what you've just said is just so thoughtful. But I think as a society, we have to go back to the very beginning. The foundation of equitable societies is education. And without education, we don't have them. If you look at the research for the past 30 years across country, across continent, the research is unequivocal. When women are educated through secondary school, it's not primary school, it's secondary school. Infant mortality declines, child mortality declines, malnutrition declines, and fertility is reduced. The benefits are greater than that, though. We know in societies that support female education, that support access to financial inclusion, support access to health, these are the societies that have women leaders. And when we have women in leadership roles, the new evidence shows our societies are less corrupt. We have honest government. So this is the foundation of all the work that you're talking about. So briefly, how are we doing? I think, as Harriet said last night, we have lost a bit of the sense of urgency, and we've patted ourselves on the back, and we're not talking about girls' education anymore. Yes, 9 out of 10 girls around the world finish primary school. Only a third in low-income countries finish secondary school. And completely off the table are the 258 million children out of school. 100 million of them are girls who should be in secondary education. We have so many of them in the region where I live. It's astonishing. So one thing we need to do is focus on education again. Let's make this a priority. Number 2, let's quit talking about enrollment. Enrollment doesn't tell us anything. It tells us if you're sitting in a desk. Let's focus on learning. Let's ask governments to get rid of the enrollment data and start focusing on learning. And I think that's critically important. And finally, the data is critically important, but as humans, we live through stories. So let me just end with a story. I have the most inspiring women I've ever worked with in my life in Northeast Nigeria. The world called them the Chibok girls. Let me tell you, they are not girls. They're incredible women. Let me tell you the story of Mary, who had giving her diploma, her college diploma, 2 weeks ago. We can't imagine what Mary lived through, but the person she has become reminds me every day of how education transforms lives. Mary became a student leader. She ran an organization on campus. She studied abroad in home, right? And became a person. And I asked her before she graduated, what does this education mean to you, Mary, to your life? And her words are in my heart forever. Education gives me the wings to fly, the power to fight, and the voice to speak. Let's work together to make sure every young person can say those words. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And actually, what a really appropriate moment for us to turn it over to the audience, because I think what we're not interested in doing at this event is just hearing from our panelists, although I will say a big round of applause, they have been amazing. I think it's also really important that we hear from you, and that particularly we hear reflections you may have, your views on how we really move the dial on meaningful leadership. And other reflections and comments that you may have. And if you want to also ask a question for a little bit more information from any of our individual panelists, please do feel free to do that. So without further ado, I think we have a roving microphone in the audience. If anyone would like to come in with any questions or comments at this point, please do.
If we can have a strategic plan for the whole of Commonwealth business, women, people, so that we can come up with a system that we can all follow and plug into, and we can have the KPIs at the end of each year, I think it will also help us not to like jump here and there from each country with their own vision. Thank you very much, and I'm happy. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very, very practical recommendation, and really putting the focus on making sure that we don't, get complacent, that we really remember we have to practically and proactively promote and support women's leadership. Yes, a colleague over on the left-hand side in the blue, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Doreen Sioka from Namibia, Minister of Gender. Underline gender equality, poverty eradication, and social welfare. So what I wanted to comment on is just an advice, maybe one solution to the issue of empowerment of women in decision making. I'll give the example of Namibia. What I did when I was given the portfolio in 2010. 2012, what I did was to request my political party to amend their constitution. Top 4, that includes the president, the vice president, the secretary general, and deputy secretary general. We have to make sure that 50-50 applies there when we amended the constitution. So right now, we had president is a man, vice president is a woman, and also secretary general is a woman, deputy secretary was a man, even though he left us, and may his soul rest in peace. There were 4 of them. So 50-50 applied. We amended the constitution. Then later on, what we did, wherever any provision, wherever there are 3 people, we have to make sure there's a woman in the constitution. That, because there was a political will, it's an opportunity for me to convince my leadership that I have to make sure that I achieve gender equality in those provisions. Wherever there are 4 people, 2 should be women, 2 should be men. So amendment was done. We achieved, is where we achieved 47% last, but now we dropped because, why we dropped? Because the party did not perform well. And I have to proceed again and try to convince the opposition within our parliament. They were so negative. But now we have achieved, because the one parties who are willing also to amend their constitution so that we achieve this 50-50. Otherwise, for one political party, will not do it well, as we did last. And now there's a talk in Namibia of saying this is our time now. Meaning the president who is coming now should be a woman. We don't want a man. It's our time in Namibia. Therefore, that's why I'm encouraging my colleagues, just dance to the tune of the political will, whereby you have to amend the constitution of your political parties. And next week, I'm going to meet the Electoral Commission. If these people are not going to comply with the amendment of the constitution, Electoral Commission also we have to amend the Electoral Act, that whenever we present our list, they should be 50-50, zebra list. Thus, I'm entitled to the name zebra list. Yes, because I said I don't want this quota system because it's on a mess of somebody. All I need is zebra list in our constitution. Whenever we present our list, it has to show that zebra list. Men, woman.
Yeah.
So that is the other way, maybe how we will achieve. I know Namibia is not, we have achieved on education, obviously after Beijing plus platform for action. We achieved girls are the majority, both in secondary education and university level. Girls are leading more than men. But now we have seen it that we have done it wrongly. We have to baba a boy child also, so that education, as my colleague have said there, is the only key to success. Is the only key. I think with these few remarks, thank you very much. Let me acknowledge my seniors I have left out. My sister, the First Lady, and my sister, Patricia Scotland. I acknowledge you. Thank you very much. We talk much about you in Namibia.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, and thank you for reminding us how important it is that political parties also embrace gender equality and what an important role that they can play in terms of promoting and supporting and enabling more women into local leadership at all levels. There's a colleague here. Oh, please do. Yes.
Who's the Walthamstow MP in London has started a new initiative that I'm involved in, which is called Mother Red. So think of mothered, but the last three letters of mothered are R-E-D, and red is the Labour colour. Because she realised that for mothers who wanted to get involved in political parties, it was particularly difficult. Because though in one sense there's a level playing field and you go and seek a nomination, but for mothers, just how do you organise for the childcare for that? You know, for women who are single parents, all the different things. And so she actually gives a small grant, not a lot of money, she's raised money and has mentored and helped 20, and now it's going to be 40 mothers to go and at least have some financial support to give them the chance to put themselves forward. Because often it's those practical steps that we've been talking about that we forget about, because it's not enough to make women's quotas for women if it's only the fortunate women that can afford to take it up. You know, we don't achieve equality. I say this often about my own profession in the law. We now in the bar see a lot more women. But if they're all, in fact, posh girls replacing posh boys, we're not actually doing anything unless we can ensure that women who came from the sort of background that I came from also have that opportunity. And when I've got the mic, one other thing that's come out that we need to say is data. You know, across the Commonwealth, there are plenty of places we don't even aggregate the data. So we don't even know the numbers about how many women. And this is the one thing that we could do in this summit, is promote making sure that countries collect the data, because then that is the basic thing you need to start with. And I know Secretary General Scotland is here, and I know in 2019 she started an initiative just before COVID about data on domestic abuse across the Commonwealth. And that example that you made, Patricia, could also be used with so many other things, and we should encourage the heads of government when they meet to focus on getting the data so we can actually see what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Did you want to come in briefly as well? Harriet, please.
The point about what gets measured gets done, so it is really important to measure things. But on the political parties front, in my political party, the women got together and we set up something called Women to Win, because guess what? Actually, women win more votes. Statistically, in elections, they do tend to do better. And so we fundraise together, we help women who are standing for election, and we're always looking for more women to stand for election. So it is incredibly important that we work together to do those kinds of things as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Harriet. I'm going to bring in 2 or 3 other speakers. There's one lady here in the red. I'm going to bring you in first. Then at the back in the white shirt. And then this lady 3 rows back. If I bring you 3 in to start with, and then we'll probably have round for another, I think. Please, go ahead.
I'm Shirley Randall from Australia, and we've just had another wonderful election where we now have a Labor government and we have a majority of women in that side of the House, and we have independents who have spoken, and so that's fantastic. But I wanted just to say, this afternoon I'm speaking with a whole group of people about intergenerational activities, and we don't have enough leaders who are looking at older women. We do have some older leaders who've been they've been fantastic in their day, but like I have a new knee, they have problems and end up in older people's institutions, and they are terribly neglected. They're not visible. So I think as leaders, we have a real responsibility to work with our governments to make sure that older women, older people generally, but particularly older women, because of that statistic, Cherry, you were talking about, we need the statistics of just what's happening, but certainly in my country and in other countries in the Commonwealth, they are amazingly big proportion of what's happening in older people's institutions. And as leaders, we need to work to make sure that we do pay attention to the women who've become invisible, even though they have been so strong during their lives. I hope people will come and listen to our program this afternoon.
Thank you, and I think that also links very nicely with a lot of the reflections that colleagues have given here today around what they would have told their former self. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot that we can learn from that and remember as we move forward in terms of the diversity of leadership and the strength that we draw from that diversity. There's a colleague at the back in a white shirt.
Thank you very much. I'm Alim Susan from National Organization of Trade Unions in Uganda. I'm a school teacher, and I would like to say that from the presentations made, I am honored to be here. In your discussions, I did realize you made comments on the wage gap and in relation to the gender gap. Why do I rise? I really need us to appreciate that we women seated in here, I, for example, left school to come and attend this women's forum, but also to let you know that we women spend most of our time, productive time, at work. It is so important for us to appreciate as Commonwealth and therefore heads of states that the woman spends most of her time at work, and then when she gets back home, she has that. It's good we have plans of financial inclusion, but also the world of work itself. We've had the political will. In Uganda, I think we've made one of the largest strides. We are having a second vice president female, a second speaker of parliament female. We've had a female general, what I would call a high-ranking officer in the UPDF. But when it gets to the world of work, where are we? Where are we? We've had the CEOs, the stone is not turning. Where are we? And why do I therefore rise to say this? Because in your own presentations, my lady colleagues, you did mention women challenges, especially in the world of work. I've gone for financial assistance in the banks. Indeed, the banks don't trust the women. The banks don't trust the women. You still have to get accreditation from your husband. When are we turning that? Can't I make that financial decision? Do I need an approval from a husband? I need that question answered because you made mention of it, especially I should say I admire Sherry. I should say that. When are we going to turn that stone? When is that woman in the market selling tomatoes and onions going to make that decision? When are those conditions changing? Ladies and gentlemen, the world of work is different. We're empowering women into the political sphere. The women are coming up. How many of us are moving with those that are right there? How many of us are moving with the nurses that are in the hospitals? How many of us are moving with high school teachers like me? How many? Let's take it. How many of us are moving with the farm plantation women? Let's take it. It's not a platform of sitting and talking, yet the real woman is down there. I would like to say this with due respect to my authorities, that until we pay attention to that woman on the ground, I rest my case.
Thank you. I want to bring in the lady at the back in the white t-shirt. Yes, please. There was a problem with the mic originally, so you didn't hear her. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Mami Abusumtre, and I am here with WHO, working on Cervical Cancer Elimination Initiative. And I'm really moved by today's discussions that we're having, especially since I do have a personal experience. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency, the First Lady of Rwanda, Your Excellency Jeanette Kagame. 4 years ago, I applied for a job. And when I applied for the job, I didn't think I was going to get an immediate reaction. I was shortlisted, and just around the time I was shortlisted, I found out I was pregnant. So I was caught in the dilemma of, do I go ahead with this job opportunity? And there was everything in me that said, you know, just do it. And also there was a part of me that said, you might not even go through the process. You may not be selected. So I just went through. The first interview was online. Then I went on to the second, and I had to go and present to who would be my new bosses and let them know what my budget was. At this time, I was 6 months pregnant. I went. Nobody asked me anything about how I looked, and I was selected. And we have talked about women paving the way for women to go into leadership positions. And it was through this experience I became the executive secretary for the Organization of African First Ladies for Women, for Development of Africa. And this is OFLAD. Your Excellency Jeanette Kagame, she's an active member of that organization. And we have 46 other African First Ladies who, in their own right, are able to make way for women. And I experienced this firsthand. And it was very interesting, because when I had my son, who's now 4, out of nowhere, the First Ladies were sending messages and asking me how my son was doing. And they fondly call him the OFLAD baby. I think it's important to share this because as we go ahead, we really need to look at how we're going to also help women coming up. And the First Ladies have, in their own way, found unconventional ways to break those barriers that exist for us every day. And I just want to say thank you, and would like to add this to encourage everyone to use the path that they have and opportunities that they have to afford other women opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for really emphasizing, the power of that networking. And I think if the Commonwealth is one thing, it is a giant network, and there's such a lot of scope to use the different networks within the Commonwealth to promote many of these key issues and to support women in leadership. I've got a colleague at the front in the orange, please. I'm going to go to you first. Having started really early with lots of time, now we're running very quickly to the end, which is always the way. I am going to bring you in again, panelists, though, please.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I don't have any question, but I want to make some comment, and I want to share experiences of my country, Bangladesh. I am Fazilatun Nasa Indira, Minister of State, Minister of Women and Children Affairs, Bangladesh. In our country, the Prime Minister is woman, the Speaker is woman, and Leader of Opposition is woman, and Deputy Leader of the Parliament is also woman, which is hardly seen in the world. Actually, really, it is very difficult to make a woman leadership. Women leadership or women empowerment, whatever you say, it will first come from the family. Because family is the first institution to make leadership for their daughters or their sisters, and as well as empowerment also. In Bangladesh, total number of women parliamentarians are 74. Of these, 15 parliamentarians are women from reserved seat. 20,000 women are elected from local government election. Here, lots of problems were identified and discussed. I will say some of the problems. One of the most important problems is socio-cultural barriers for becoming women leadership. And another problem is there is no much awareness about women leadership and how people will be benefited from women leadership. Actually, women are very much sincere and they are honest. They perform their work sincerely and honestly. If we look at the word women leader or head of the government of the state, we will see that where the women are the head of the state or head of the political party, actually they run their state properly and their political party also run properly, and they are the woman-friendly head of the state and woman-friendly political party. In our country, the largest political party is Bangladesh Awami League. headed by our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. And we have the provision to include 33% of the women in each level of committee. And it is already ensured representation of the People Order 1972. Thank you very much. And if you give me just a minute, I can also mention about other leadership of the women. In our country, secretaries are women. The high officials are also working in the defense. Even in the even peacekeeping mission, our women defense are working. And another important issue is that regarding economic empowerment of the women, 4 million women are working in the RMG industrial section, which is the biggest export earning sector in our country. In addition, Bangladesh's women are working abroad, and they are the bread winner of their family, and they are the agent of change maker of the community and the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and thank you for raising those really critically important points. I know that there are still lots of hands in the room. I'm going to take two. The lady directly ahead of me, and this lady just here, yes. And I'm going to take one more from over here because I've been very slack at not doing that. Right at the very back on the right-hand side. And then I'm going to bring in my panelists. So I really would implore you to be really smart and quick with your comments, and then I'm going to bring in our Secretary General.
Thank you very much,
Please.
Madam Moderator. Your Excellency, Madam the First Lady of Rwanda seated, Madam Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat. My name is Janet Kem. I'm the UN Women Representative in Rwanda. Thank you. I just want to add my voice to all what has been said, to say all, listening to all the discussions. One great thing we can do as women leaders is to understand the feminist leadership principles. Know them, use them, make our institutions accountable on these principles. They are just simple principles. The first is knowing ourselves, self-awareness. The second is self-care and caring for others. We've talked about that. The third is to dismantle bias. We've talked about stereotypes, bias, discrimination. The fourth is to ensure inclusion. And we come down to sharing of power. Sharing amongst ourselves with youths, with elderly women, with men, we can share power. Then we come down to responsible and transparent leadership, especially as we are talking about inclusion and accountability. So I will end on that just to say we can round up all of this by making leadership feminine, responsive, and responsible, and making sure that we know those principles and we hold institutions accountable. And I will not end without saying one thing, bringing men on board. Fathers, empower your daughters. Daughters that are empowered by their fathers become good and strong leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have two quick ones from the middle. The lady there with the black shirt right at the back, and then the lady here with the, yes, big earrings is the thing I'm going to see. And then the final one is the hand literally on the, almost on the back row. And I really apologize for those not coming in. And please keep it snappy.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, hang on. No, sorry. This lady first. I'll come to you in a second, please.
Hi, is the microphone on?
Yes.
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much for hosting us here today. My name is Tanya Mulamula, and I'm from Tanzania. And before I proceed, I would like to really speak about the women leaders in our country. We have a female president. We have a female Speaker of Parliament. We have a female foreign minister, a female defense minister, a female education minister, a female minister of industry and trade, female businesswomen that you see in the room here today. I can continue on, but I don't have much time. One of my comments, and I hope it will probably be addressed in the next session, is for women in the private sector and how we can address economic empowerment. An economically empowered woman can make a lot of moves to ensure that all women are empowered in various positions. So I would really love, in maybe future forums, is to see females in the financial institution, MFIs as well as MNOs, in terms of how do we increase finance for women, access to finance, not just in the grant sector, but in the loans and equity debt, venture, capitalism, angel investors, because many of us in the private sector are really struggling to access finance, and the banks, the MFIs, the MNOs as well, because MNOs meaning mobile money is a very big part of how we transact today in our developing countries. We need them to hear the problems we're facing, and we need to find ways to mitigate and bridge that gap. So I'm looking forward to the session we have after lunch to discuss this, because from us as a company operating regionally in the region, we employ majority women, but sometimes the cash flows are so tight. So in the private sector, if we get more access to finance, if we scale up, if we grow, we can also employ women, because we have policies in place to ensure that women, I'm a mother, a new mother, my baby is very young, I left her alone at home in Tanzania, but we are able to create policies in the workspace that are geared to maternal inclusion for women, postpartum, mental health, breastfeeding rooms, maternity leave, daycare, etc. Yeah. And if more of us are there, it makes it easier. And we might not always do it in the corporate setting, but in the private entrepreneurship space, I control the policies in my office in Tanzania, and my partner here does it in Rwanda, and so forth and so forth. But economic empowerment is so key for us to grow and scale up. So I look forward to having more of those conversations and more of that inclusions in the panels and discussions. So my partner would like to
thank you for highlighting
very
that.
Quickly,
I have to just go back to the people I was going to say. I think they're incredibly important points.
Thank you very
much. But I do want to bring in some other people, please.
Thank you. Just literally 1 second, while I'm here. Thank you all so much, panelists. We have taken in everything that you have said. Like my business partner here said, we came all the way from Tanzania just for this. The only thing I have to say to you all of us women in here, we can speak all we want about gender equality, about women empowerment, but we need to give each other as women those chances. The number of times from us as a private sector, we have missed chances from women who have not listened to us, who have not given us the opportunity. So we need to move from talking to acting. Women.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Please.
Thank you.
This lady here at the front, in the front, and then I've got one at the back, right at the very back, and then I want to bring in Shabana, who was going to be one of our lightning speakers, and then I want to give the floor to the Secretary General. So please.
Thank you very much. I'm Samantha Bowen from Common Age, and my question is directed to the panelists. We had the lady over here speaking about the representation of older women, and I was wondering, through your work, how have you included older women through your advocacy, ensuring legislation, and using that to empower them and ensure that we learn from their experiences, and that younger people are included also in listening to those discussions as well?
Does any one person want to come in on that? Shall I bring you? Please, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, and I was going to comment on it earlier as well. The lady here in the lovely red sari. There's two sides to this debate, and I can speak from both the Commonwealth perspective and my own countries. Funnily enough, I have met a number of women in jail. I'm a lawyer, so I used to work in jail a lot. And over there, a lot of the women were older women, surprisingly not younger women, and they were incarcerated for usually murder, simply because they had been shamed in front of the younger women in the family. So it's interesting, that dynamic. In Pakistan, it's just the reverse. We have a very strong patriarchy, which includes older women. So in some sense, in our country, the problem is not for the older generations, for the younger one, because they're never allowed to come forward. But in terms of legislation, we've recently passed legislation. We don't have culturally yet old people homes, and parents are taken care of by somebody or the other. But we have recently introduced legislation that should that ever come into being, they are entitled, even if they've never worked for the country, had a formal job, they are entitled to health care, personal care, all of that. So legislation helps, but I think cultural norms, the balance has to be found. And often I'll tell you, this is a problem, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that part of the world, that usually it's the mother-in-law that controls the home, the finances, everything. So in some sense, they have all the power, because it's also out of respect. It's recognition that she raised a family and then she brought them to this place. So that is, in some senses, a cultural issue as well as a legislative issue. Thank you.
Could I just pick up also on the older people point, because having turned 60 during the pandemic myself, I have a strong vested interest and have decided that 60 is the new 40. Absolutely. So and I think 2 points that in terms of the UK legislation is my retirement age used to have been 60, and we've legislated to move it equal to men, and now both retirement ages are the same and much later. And of course that means that people can appoint women in their 50s, which before they were not doing, and often that is when you're in your professional prime. So I think that's been really important in terms of equalising job opportunities for older women. And the other thing is that our Speaker has just announced that the UK Parliament is going to be a menopause-friendly workplace. Yeah, and I think that's going to be quite relevant to quite a few female colleagues. Yeah.
Thank you. Secretary General, let me bring you in here, please. Can we have a mic at the front, please? Here it comes. Oh, you have two. You have a choice.
Firstly, can I say what an amazing privilege it is to look at all these beautiful women on the panel. And I mean beautiful not just because of their face, but because of their heart. They're courageous and wonderful. I need also to make an admission, because of course I am just what Harriet said. I am the daughter of a man who had 5 daughters and who believed in women. But I need to tell you what we're doing, because we've been talking about data. The Commonwealth is now collecting data, and just last week we had an offer from Intel that they're going to provide us with 10,000 places to train individuals on AI and machine learning. So we will be able to use that to answer some of the questions here today and train women as well as our men. We've also about to launch our SDG 5 toolkit, which will mean that we will be able to do more together. And we're also doing equalizing the law. There's so much that I want to assure you that I'm listening to every single word, because our women are small and medium-sized businesses, and we're going to find the money to support them. So I just want to say to everyone, we're listening, we're working, and together, all of us, we can do this.
Thank you. And I know we are slightly over time, and I apologise because I've really not done my job very well, so I really apologise for that. And I know there are lots of questions that you're wanting to ask, and there will be time in the break. I want to just ask our panellists to be super speedy in leaving us just with a couple of sentences in terms of action. How do we respond to the comments from the floor, and how do we translate this now into action? I'm going to go along the line from you, Shaldana, first.
Thank you so much. So very briefly, I can comment on what the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is doing. In comparison to the IPU, the CPA, we have 180 different legislative branches, which means we have influence and access to over 18,000 parliamentarians, a very small number of which are women, but nonetheless. What we have done, and because of COVID things slowed down, the CPA, thanks to Stephen and my team here, we have initiated a pact or an MOU with the UN Women in New York, and we want to work on SDG 5 as a part of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. The practical example of that, which we did recently and hopefully in our General Assembly 2 months from now in Canada, we are going to introduce 2 legislative amendments, which should have happened 32 years ago. One is that the executive committee must consist of 1/3 women. It has to be compulsory. The second thing is that the delegates that come for any event of the Commonwealth, in particular our conferences, which should be every year, half the delegates must be women if the delegation has a woman speaker, if not another woman. So it's going to be hard, but we've already started. So.
Wonderful, walking the talk, brilliant. Margie, over to you.
In this room is that gender equity is possible. Real progress has been made, and the world needs to hear these stories. So I would just recommend that in addition to collecting the data and making it more accessible and collecting the right data, tell the stories. We live in a time of uncertainty and fear and despair. Outside of this room, outside of this sector, people do not understand the progress that's been made in women's leadership and in all of the areas that we've talked about. So I ask you, tell the stories of these women. Make a documentary. The world needs to hear the progress that's been made and the possibilities that are ahead of us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tell the story. Tembi, over to you.
Talk to just one, which Commonwealth, which is the room we're all in here, is holding. It's a program called Connecting the Dots. We are currently piloting in Eswatini, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And our first target initially was 15% of women in leadership, both politically and administratively in senior leadership. And I'm pleased that with about 8 or so 9 months we've started, we've surpassed that target to around 31%. And what it means now is the rollout, which is what I will plead for as part of what this gathering in these 2 days will need to take. The blueprint is already available. I think I've forgotten Botswana, in mentioning Botswana in one of the piloting countries there. The blueprint is already available. Let's do not reinvent the wheel. The blueprint, penalty to where it's necessary. Roll out so that in the next Commonwealth gender equality discussion, we will then all be talking about the reflections and the targets which have been received under the well-funded programs of the Commonwealth. I think I'll leave that for the House. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cherie, please.
Well, let me talk about women's economic empowerment, because that's what my foundation does. So when we started off, we started from nothing, and 3 years ago, January 2020, we'd already reached over 130,000 women. We set ourselves a target that in 3 years we would reach another 100,000 women. Like say that we've still got a few months to go, we will exceed that. So looking ahead, we decided, what do we want to achieve by 2030 when the Sustainable Development Goals are supposed to be gained? So we've decided that we will reach 1 million women by then, and with your help, we will do it.
Finally, Harriet.
This time last year, the UK and Kenya were honoured to host the Global Partnership for Education and the replenishment of that. And at that event, President Kenyatta encouraged leaders and heads of state to sign the Declaration for Education. And I've been lobbying my Prime Minister as the Commonwealth. Surely all Commonwealth countries should be signing that declaration. And Madam First Lady, through you, as Rwanda, with your fantastic track record on education, takes on the chair of this wonderful organization, perhaps Rwanda will be able to achieve that success of every one of the 54 heads of government signing that declaration for education.
Thanks very much indeed. There's nothing more really for me to say. I'm not going to try and wind up such an incredibly rich discussion. We will capture it, and we'll share the outcomes. I want to release everybody really to go and network and ask some of those questions that you maybe didn't have the chance to ask in this session. I'd like to just thank our panelists, our earlier speakers, and particularly you as such an engaged audience, really setting the bar high, I think, for the rest of the session. Thank you so much.